probably wondering, should I be keeping my champions or not? Should I be keeping multiple copies of my champions? Well, this video is for you guys. Welcome to another video. By the way, guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It will help me out. The journey to 50K is a never-ending one, it feels like. So, with the city of Cintranos, with the Cursed City, guys, I am in a real, dilemma, right? I'm thinking, okay, how many champions do I really need to start keeping copies of? This place right here actually has made it so that we have to consider keeping multiple copies of so many different champions that is just crazy. And basically all your legendaries now are pretty much at a point where, okay, I could use a copy of that legendary instead of feeding it to empower your champion. And of course, keeping copies also helps you with the faction guardian, so it makes your champion stronger. Not so much for the epics and rares, but it does still make a difference. So much so that I have actually went and filled up all my epics in terms of faction guardians, but not so much for the rares. For the rares, I would say that only some of the faction guardians in terms of the specific factions would be useful for you guys. And I'm talking for the rares that you would be using in teams such as Ares. If you're using a Demitha team, Apothecary could get some, added bonus like a defense and HP, and that helps him out in the long run. And then we have other very, very specific rares which are amazing even in the end game. And I'm talking Painkeeper and Cold Heart, and I'll cover those on how I use them personally in the game. So let's get started. I'm gonna go through some of the legendaries, although I don't feel like legendaries really have any place of getting fed anymore. And I'm talking empowering your legendaries. Of course, if you are a big spender, you don't really care about that, right? You are summoning like crazy and you're just doing whatever the heck you want in this game, honestly. But if you are somebody who has a younger account or somebody who's getting into the late game and you want to consider, right, which champions are really worth the effort of, getting them to that point beyond just being a faction guardian, getting them to level 60, fully ascended, masteries, really takes a toll on your resources, especially when there's so many events going on in raid right now. So you have to consider it twice, think about it twice before just fully investing. So I'll just show you some of the champions that I have copies of in terms of like legendaries. I think if we filter based on affinity, it would be easier to show the copies of. And I'm going to show you guys, let's say the legendaries first that I have copies of that I fully invested in. And we're going to go all the way down to, let's find my newts. Newts here are just fantastic. This guy is an obvious make a copy of champion. The more you have, the better. It's just plain obvious. A enemy max HP, triple hitting skill that has a relatively okay cooldown. I mean, for a triple hitting skill, I could have expected this to be even higher, but it's just amazing that it's on a 4-turn cooldown, which can actually be reduced, if you guys didn't know, by his own skills through this specific skill right here called Cycle of Violence Mastery. 30% chance to decrease the cooldown of a random skill by 1 turn if the damage inflicted by a skill exceeds 30% of the target's max health. So if you have him with enough damage that he does every single time, 30% of the boss's health, plus let's say a Giant Slayer proc, I believe it reduces the cooldown. I don't even think the Giant Slayer proc is needed, and you will see the cooldown decrease. So it makes an insane nuker for all bosses. It is just crazy on how Nude has changed the meta in terms of attacking bosses. Other champions, which like legendaries, which I consider like a must-have in terms of 2 copies of, I would say Trunda. Having 2 copies of a Trunda is just very, very good for building a Trunda team for the Hydra. Her A2 skill, Cloak of Ages, does tremendous amounts of damage to the Hydra heads, both when they're up but also when they're exposed. When you've taken them down, it just does insane amounts of damage, going into the millions. And you'll see obviously in the clash, in the Hydra clash, you'll see those huge teams doing insane amounts of damage. Okay, of course the insane amount of damage teams are very, very specific Trunda strategies, but if you check on, let's say, weaker clans, or if you check on even like, I'll give you guys an example on my team, which uses a double Trunda. I can use a single Trunda, but I don't have the specific setup. So the double Trunda does some very solid damage, and I can reach 1 billion damage on hard and normal, but you know, I'm not there yet for brutal and nightmare. So enough with the legendaries. I want to get over to the epics, because legendaries, I feel like it's so difficult to just give an overall guidance, especially with the City of Cintranos. I would say every single legendary needs to be considered in terms of an investment, even at level 60, because at least there you can equip them with some gear. They might not really need the masteries, but you can equip them with some gear. Let's say the stun gear, and you'll be able to have some control in the Cursed City. Other champions like Prince Kaimar, these champions that are used in PvE and PvP have multiple uses, and I'm at a point where I'm considering using a third Kaimar actually for different parts of the game. So one Kaimar for a specific dungeon, another one for a different dungeon, and one strictly for PvP. It feels endless because of his insane cooldown reducing skill, and the Terminator field effect is just an added bonus. So let me show you guys the epics that I have copies of. Okay, the epics that I have copies of, I think the MVP here to have a copy of is Geomancer, and you will not regret this. Why Geomancer? Because you'll need one build for, let's say you are doing Iron Twins. Iron Twins with Geomancer, it makes it easy. You can build a tanky team, you can build an unkillable team. It will have Geomancer in there, and you will run to 1 minute to 2 minutes for beating the Iron Twins. That's my team currently, and that's why I'm running him with almost 600 accuracy for the Iron Twins. But he doesn't need all that for other areas of the game. And which other areas of the game are you gonna be using a Geomancer? Well, you guessed it, you're gonna be using him for the Hydra. Unless you have other very specific teams with HP burns that will be overwriting Geomancer's own HP burn, then it's more than likely that you will be using Geomancer in there, and you might also be using one in Hydra, one on Clown Boss, one on Iron Twins, and you'll need to have basically different builds for each. So that helps to have multiple copies of, and I even have awakenings for each and every one of them, and actually different awakenings for them. But we do have the free reset, which I should be doing, although it doesn't really matter since I've migrated from using the Geomancers to other champions for my Hydra team. So they kind of lost their power, at least for the champions I have. When you are limited to a specific number of champions in Hydra, you can't really use everything anymore. So what did I use? Obviously have copies of. I would say my man-eaters here. I have 2 man-eaters. I have 3 Shamels. So the 2 man-eaters are an obvious usage for the Bat Eater team. So if you've got a solid Clown Boss team, then you don't really need to consider this, but the double man-eater will help you with many different areas of the game. And I would say if you have the double man-eater and a Seeker and a Painkeeper, that's the Bat Eater team. It's just the way to go, right? Next up, the Shamels. The Shamels, it's the same exact use case as the Geomancer. If you are somebody who's really struggling with the Hydra in terms of the heads, the head of Torment specifically, Shamel has this very specific passive right here where he cleanses fear and true fear when it's placed on an ally. So with this way, you are basically protected from the head of Torment. We all know the interaction that Shamel has with the head of Torment. It's just, the thing is, it makes the runs a little bit longer because of the extreme animations that his A1 skill does, but he's still very, very useful. There's multiple builds that you can do him, not just for the Hydra, but you can also build one of them as just a straight up nuker. I think I had this guy. Was it this guy? I gotta find the one that I had as a nuker. Maybe I changed the builds strictly for Hydra, but you can actually nuke pretty hard with this skill right here. His A2, which attacks one enemy 3 times and ignores 25% of the target's defense, will ignore a further 25 for each buff on this champion. So very, very hard-hitting skill, and you can see videos of Shamel just strictly just nuking people in the arena. Other champions which I've found very useful to have copies of is Painkeeper. I think Painkeeper has a use on her own as a single Painkeeper, but if you're somebody who will be considering in the future doing an Iron Twins team, there's a very easy unkillable teams using multiple copies of Painkeeper. I think there's a team with Emic, and there's a team also with Roshkar, the tower, and even Helicath. So you can consider using multiple copies of Painkeeper. But the good thing about Painkeeper is that if you don't really care about the speed of your teams, the copies of the Painkeeper don't need to have masteries. And I believe I don't have masteries on all my Painkeepers, which has saved me a good chunk of energy slash gems, depending on what you usually do for farming. An obvious use again would be Cold Heart. Cold Heart again has multiple different builds that you can do, and having multiple copies, you can keep one for Fahrenheit, you can keep one for Doom Tower. Different accuracy is needed for Doom Tower. If you're running one for Fahrenheit Hard, you'll need a completely different build of a damage dealing Cold Heart, and you don't even care about accuracy anymore on Hard. So instead of moving gear around every single time, what you do is you have multiple copies of them, and that's what I'm trying to do slowly but surely work on my Cold Heart. Not this one, but my second Cold Heart, to have a 6-star awakening as well, then my third one, and so on, just to make them as strong as I can, really. But my 6-star obviously is the strongest one, with almost like 300 speed, I believe, and 250 crit damage, and enough accuracy to actually matter in areas that I'm using here for, which is basically I believe Doom Tower and Spider. So Doom Tower for the accuracy, Spider for just the 10% damage that it does to the boss. So other epics that you might be seeing here on the screen, I have this guy, Taurus. He is an OG. He was used in some very specific teams. If you do have Zavia, if you have a nuker which requires poisons to activate them, then Taurus is somebody that can place 4 poison debuffs on enemies. So you use double Taurus. He applies 4. One guy applies 4, the other guy applies 4 again, and you pretty much have 8 poisons on there, and then you do a big burst through a poison activator, and you're good to go. The good thing about this is that you don't need any masteries to make him work the best as he can, but the masteries actually make him really good, and just add an additional bit of damage. I also have double Allure. Double Allure is one of the teams that you can use to clear Dark Fae, which is actually the rotation we have right now on Doom Tower. So double Allure, why do you need it? It's just an insane Terminator control through her A1 skill. Allure is a very good example of a champion that does not need masteries, does not need skill ups on her skills. Anything you give her beyond that, awakenings, skill books, masteries, just makes her better and helps you clear the content a little bit faster, which some people might be looking for that. I specifically didn't need to do full masteries on my second Allure, and I believe I didn't book her. I might have booked her just for, honestly, just for CBC, and that's the reason she has some skill ups there, and they work just great. 100% crit rate, you give them some speed, you give them accuracy, and they work great for Terminator control. You'll see double Allure teams on Dark Fae stage 120, and they'll keep the Terminator low. As long as you clear through the waves and you're able to beat your own copies, double Allure will keep the Terminator down, especially if you're running them with something like a Relentless set, so they can get those extra procs and actually get that Terminator down multiple times. So I also have multiple copies of Armiger. I'm not the guy to ask if you should have multiple copies of Armiger, because I was using this guy for ages in multiple videos, but the state of the game has really changed where he doesn't really fit anymore. The only teams where you can possibly push Armiger nowadays is maybe Dragon, maybe Ice Golem, depending on if they ever fix the way that his block revive works and that he actually uses it at the right time on the ads. But that would be something for the future, and for some very specific teams for the Sand Devil. Other areas where Armiger are used could be just for strictly Terminator control. Do you need to have multiple copies at level 60? No, you can definitely use just one. You can definitely use multiple copies if you want to, but at level 50. But this guy is just an MVP for, obviously, for the Terminator control. So that's why I had multiple copies of, and for my videos and content, that's why you see 4 copies at 6-star for the account. In terms of other champions, which other champions cold brew would I need? You're asking what I need for all this content that Raid is pushing out. Well, again, it all depends on where you're feeling stuck. If you're feeling stuck on Hydra, champions such as Husk and Royal Guard are champions that I had multiple copies of. I do have, I believe, 3 copies of Royal Guard and 3 or 4 copies of Husk. I believe I have at least 2 copies of Husk. And this build on Husk is like a really basic one. So about 220 speed, 100% crit, obviously, and 220 crit damage, running also some good amount of health so he stays alive, and some accuracy so he can land his provoke on the Hydra heads. With that being said, if you can also give him a relentless set with all of these stats, you're just making him better for what you're trying to do, which is just do as much damage as possible, plus the utility of the provoke on the head of decay, which is the one that can't get provoked on the Hydra. And you're running War Master on them. Why do I run War Master? It's more consistent damage that even works on through the weak hits. Some people do say that Helm Smasher may be better than straight up War Master. I find that War Master has worked for me for such a long time that I didn't really bother changing it. Plus War Master does more consistent damage on bosses, on other bosses as well that you might be fighting. And he's also capped out at the 10%. So there's no real reason to go Helm Smasher unless you're struggling to reach that 10%. Same thing goes for my Royal Guard, same kind of build as the Husk. Royal Guard, though, does not really need the accuracy unless you like the defense down on his A1 and the decreased speed on his A3. So those 2 skills can be considered as something to push for accuracy on the champion. And all of these champions, guys, I'll say it again, you don't have to get them to level 60 full masteries for skills, but some of them really change up the way that you can see some of the dungeons. And me personally, I found definite use out of champions such as Newt, which is like an MVP nowadays. He really has proven the best legendary of 2023. No idea what they're going to do in 2024, but I want to see some kind of champion that will be on par. Not same thing again, but to just show us that, you know, they're going to be changing up the game and how everything works. Other champions that can also work that I don't have copies of is I've seen teams with double stealths on the dragon, and I do think they can clear the dragon in about 20 seconds. I wonder if they're on teams of the week. We have single stealths here, double Calvalax here, double stealths, yeah. So as I said, legendaries, we've reached a point where it's very, very, very hard to consider sacrificing legendaries anymore. And you're pretty much at a point where the faction guardians that we all have, even for legendaries, we will start to work on them for the city of Cintranos, which is the end game at the moment, where many people struggle to finish the whole thing. Me especially, like I haven't cleared the whole thing yet because of the time needed, but also the big investment of champions needed. Like some champions you need just multiple copies of, and if you don't have legendaries, you have to go on the epics, and it just makes you think, okay, what are the high value epics that I can do? And like Creodan is a very solid example that I have taken 2 copies of. Creodan, and also what's the other guy? I think he's a high elf that I made 2 copies of. Neldor. These guys work very well together for epics for the Fire Knights that you'll be fighting in Cintranos, but they can also work on the normal dungeon of the Fire Knight. So this was the video, guys. I want to see some of the comments filled up with your ideas for champions you should be keeping, I should be keeping. Maybe you didn't see it covered in the video. I know I just scroll through everything a little bit too quickly in terms of the champions and the copies that I should be having. I think I went through everything that I have. Other champions that I have that are obvious are just legendaries that again, I just keep for the Cintranos. Cupidus works very nicely, but again, this is more niche use that rather than anything else. And then it all depends on your goals in the game and where you want to be focusing as the next thing and the next thing and the next thing in Raid Shadow Legends. So yeah, this was the video, guys. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.